Edward McMillan-Scott is a former member of the European Parliament, previously being with the Conservatives and then defecting to the Lib Dems. He was also the first independent Vice President of the European Parliament in the Department of Human Rights. So I want to talk about recent events, and in particular the Witney by-election. What does that say about the sort of future of the Lib Dems and the pro-European movement?
Well, I've got a bit of history here because in 1999, the former Conservative MP for Witney, a guy called Sean Woodward, who is the father of Deliciously Ella, the food writer, defected to Labour from the Conservatives. And at that point, as I was a Conservative and a pro-European, the previous MP for Witney, Douglas Hurd, said to me, "Go on, Edward, have a go at it. It's a nice seat and you live very nearby." I went to see the agent in Witney, the Conservative agent, and he said we don't want any pro-Europeans here, and they chose David Cameron. And the rest is history. So this time round, with a by-election taking place following David Cameron's resignation, I put my name in. I was shortlisted by the Lib Dems, and sadly I wasn't chosen. They chose, quite understandably, a local woman with great experience of the constituency. But what it showed was that from having a 25,000 majority in the 2015 general election, that was cut to 5,000, primarily by the Lib Dems. And the only role I was able to play, apart from some campaigning, was to circulate a letter in the constituency.
Which went viral.
Which did indeed go very well. So at least I think I made some effort and some effect on the campaign. And actually, I don't think it was ever going to be winnable by the Lib Dems, but it was a tremendous campaign and a very good candidate.
Just to give people a bit of context, we're here at the Warwick European Society event, and one of the questions that was asked is what can a particular person do to sort of help from now on with Brexit. One of the things people have been talking about is these by-elections like Witney, and in the news today, Zac Goldsmith has resigned, and you won't know this because this happened during your talk, but the Conservatives have announced they won't stand a candidate against Mr Goldsmith, sort of keeping the man in Richmond. Richmond voted overwhelmingly to stay in the EU. So how is the pro-European movement going to organise itself against Mr Goldsmith, do you think?
Well, we can't forget that Zac Goldsmith's father was the founder of the Referendum Party and used to be in the European Parliament with me for a short time. And the Referendum Party did great damage to the Conservatives because at a subsequent election it nibbled away enough of their seats to lose the Conservatives the election. So there's always the capacity of these fringe parties to have an effect. But Zac Goldsmith, okay, he's a Tory, he's a Eurosceptic, he can afford to be, and if he stands as a candidate as an independent, I'm sure he will get back, and he's made his protest, and that's the end of the story. However, there is a tradition of Richmond being a Lib Dem seat, and until quite recently, in fact. And so a lot of effort will go into that campaign, and I think there's a good chance the Lib Dems might take it. And indeed, as you say, the Brexit factor in Witney was very, very clear. People in Witney voted about 53% in favour of Remain in that constituency. It was even greater in Richmond. And it's a London seat, and there will be a lot of effort. And I hope that the Zac Goldsmith has made his calculations wrong, and he then retires to enjoy his millions elsewhere.
Can Paddy Ashdown's, he's formed this group called More United, hasn't he? Is that going to take off, do you think? Because it's been quite quiet so far.
Well, I joined More United, and I think it has the capacity to be an extremely important pressure group in the centre of politics, supporting membership of the European Union. The problem about the successor to Stronger In is that it's equivocating slightly about what we're looking for. The only organisations that are unequivocally in favour of staying in the European Union are the Lib Dem Party and the European movement. And so I think it's going to be important that in the coming weeks, organisations that seek to promote European relationships, like Paddy Ashdown's operation, should be unequivocal. It's not just the single market we need. Actually, it is to have the status quo. It is the best bet on offer. You cannot beat the deal Britain has got with the European Union. When you look at the exemptions that Britain has got, we're not in Schengen, we're not in the Euro, we're not in various parts of Justice and Home Affairs. We have so many exemptions that other countries do not have, that the Europeans are aghast that David Cameron went back for more. Although they gave him more, it didn't work in the end. But I still say the best bet is to stay in the European Union as we are. The cost of not being in, for industry and for commerce in particular, for the aviation sector, for transport, is going to be massive costs which will be passed on to the consumer. And that consumer is you and me. It's not worth it.
Some people will accuse you of being anti-democratic in you not believing we should accept the referendum result. Where would you go from here? Would you have another general election? Would you have another referendum on the terms, parliamentary vote?
Look, I set up the European Union's largest single programme to propagate democracy and the rule of law, human rights, free media around the world. As a result of that, the European Union now finances through that programme all election observation missions that we do, whether it's in Kenya or Egypt or wherever it may be. If I had been chairing an election observation mission on the last referendum, the European Union referendum, I would have qualified the result by saying there was quite clear media bias that wasn't corrected. There was a bias in the way in which the franchise was set. No 16 and 17-year-olds voting. People from 55 countries around the world could vote, but not European Union countries, except Malta and Cyprus because they're in the Commonwealth. So the franchise was wrong. The way in which the election was conducted in many respects was deficient by international standards. We are perfectly entitled to say, not just because we believe that staying in the European Union is the best option, but because the referendum was a con. The Leave campaign was full of lies and distortions and post-truth politics. Lies like, let's give the NHS the 350 million pounds a week that goes to Brussels. We can't stop Turkey joining the EU. All that was a propaganda campaign, and it was disgraceful, and it should not have happened in this country. And I hope the British people will wake up to the con, the pup they've been sold. They've been suckered by the Vote Leave campaign.
So is that another referendum then, or is that another election for our unelected Prime Minister?
How it's done, we're going to have a long period of adjustment as the political and the economic reality of Brexit begins to be borne in on the British people. At some point, Theresa May has said she may trigger Article 50 at the end of March. That might slip. There are elections, crucial elections taking place in Germany, which is a very important country in the European Union, and in France later on in the year. But if the Article 50 is triggered, it means a 2-year process during which at any time we can change our minds and say we got it wrong. At the end of that process, which I understand we may hear a bit more about as a result of Theresa May's statement this week, that I believe the House of Commons should be involved fully. First of all, in knowing exactly what Article 50 means, what in broad terms the government is going for in the negotiations, not necessarily the absolute details, but in broad terms we need to know. And finally, when it comes to the actual terms which are being offered by the European Union, there should be either a vote in Parliament or a referendum. I don't mind which it is, provided the British public is satisfied that it has had a proper say in the actual outcome.
Final few things. Why did you leave the Conservative Party then?
I have been a pro-European all my life. I saw the Conservative Party going step by step towards a more Eurosceptic position. The opposition to the euro on principle, not because it was a good thing or a bad thing for Britain, but just on principle because they didn't like the idea. And a whole range of other policies which made it more and more difficult for me to stay within the Conservative Party. But the final straw was one that has become quite important recently, and that was when David Cameron, during his leadership campaign in 2005, pledged to a group of Eurosceptic parliamentarians that he would withdraw from the mainstream Christian Democrat Conservative European People's Party in the European Union. That is the most important group in the EU, dominated not surprisingly by Germany because it's the biggest country, but nevertheless one that really mattered to us in terms of projecting our interests as the UK. I thought it was against the national interest to withdraw from the EPP. It has now been revealed by David Cameron's policy advisor, Daniel Korski, that he too realised it was a great mistake, and had we stayed in that group, the capacity of David Cameron to achieve a greater success in the negotiations that he began before the referendum might have been achieved. So my final straw was the leaving of the EPP, but in particular the replacement group which Cameron created, known as the ECR, to be led by an extremist from Poland who had a recent Euro neo-Nazi past, I thought was too much, and I therefore stood against him and won my position as the first independent Vice President of the European Parliament, because so many other people in the European Parliament agreed with me.
And just finally, so you are very pro-Europe, obviously. You want us to stay in. How achievable do you think that is, honestly?
I can't predict, but I think one thing I would say is that the British people have, over time, shown incredibly good sense and a long view, and I believe that the referendum that took place on the 23rd of June was an aberration. I think, had it taken place even 2 weeks later, the scales would have fallen from people's eyes, they would have realised what a con they were being sold, and there would have been a different result. And there are multiple reasons why that could have been the case, not least of which the BBC's attempt to try and provide balance actually provided bias towards Brexit. So I'm an optimist for the future. I believe, given time, the British people will change their minds during a rethink, either through a referendum or through a parliamentary vote. Bear in mind that the vast majority of MPs, and of course members of the House of Lords, are wholly in favour of British membership of the European Union continuing as it is. So we can go on with our programme of reform in the European Union, but get the benefits of membership at a very troubling time in world affairs.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Edward McMillan-Scott, and you're listening to Raw.